always thrilled to be working with another Shepherd alum, and Hans Fogle is an alum of Shepherd University's communications program, and he's currently the public information officer for Jefferson County Schools. Hans, thank you for your time tonight, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Ashley, for letting me be a part of this again. It's wonderful to be back at Shepherd and part of such an important conversation here in our community. We are going to be broadcasting live, as you've heard, on the Panhandle News Network, WEPM and WCST. They're going to give me the go-ahead to officially get started this evening with our program and reintroducing our panel, and then starting questions from the groups that you've developed over the last half hour or so. So thank you all for your open, honest conversation. These can be difficult conversations, but are critically important conversations. And you might, in the discussion tonight, hear things that trigger you one way or the other. And I hope that you'll be able to take that and let the trigger be for curiosity and getting the perspective of other people. Ask yourself what it is about what you're hearing that is causing you to have certain feelings, and then listen to other people who have different experiences and different perspectives on it. And I think we'll have a good, I think, hopefully perspective-changing conversation tonight as a group and as a community, and letting our folks back at home who are listening online be part of that as well. Good evening, I'm Hans Fogle, coming to you from Shepherd University in the Storer Ballroom as the Stubblefield Institute's community engagement conversation about policing of hate crimes and hate speech begins. We have a room filled with concerned citizens, students, faculty who have been engaged in conversation to help develop some questions for our panelists this evening. I'd like to start by thanking our sponsors, though, the Eastern West Virginia Community Foundation, Skinner Accident and Injury Lawyers, the National Endowment for the Humanities, and the West Virginia Humanities Council for making this possible. The Stubblefield Institute for Civil Political Communication at Shepherd University is going to be holding a series of these types of conversations that are so important for our entire community. I'll introduce first our panelists this evening. Rita Caufield, she is Legal Redress Committee Chair for the Berkeley County chapter of the NAACP. Sheriff Nathan Harmon, who is the sheriff in Berkeley County. Keith Pollard, who is a hate crime victim advocate with the Eastern Panhandle Empowerment Center and Stop Hate WV, Hope Lives Here. And Bill Powell, former U.S. attorney currently with Steptoe and Johnson. These four individuals are going to be taking questions from our panel this evening that have been developed over small group discussions to talk about hate crimes and hate speech. Important for us to move forward is to have a shared understanding of what hate speech really is. What is a hate crime? Tonight, for the purposes of this conversation, a hate crime will be defined by West Virginia State Code. It says that all persons within the boundaries of the state of West Virginia have the right to be free from any violence or intimidation by threat of violence committed against their persons or property because of their race, color, religion, ancestry, national origin, political affiliation, or sex. The Department of Justice provides a set of vocabulary and background regarding the legal understanding of hate crime. Hate crime at the federal level is a crime that was motivated by bias against race, color, religion, national origin, sexual orientation, gender, gender identity, or disability. A bias or hate incident is acts of prejudice that are not crimes and do not involve violence, threats, or property damage. You can learn more about these definitions and hate crime at justice.gov/hatecrimes. For the purposes of this night's conversation, it's important to have a shared understanding, though, about what exactly that means, because not all hate speech constitutes a hate crime by those definitions. However, the two are certainly intertwined. Starting off tonight, we have a question for our panel about our community specifically, and we will put this to the group. Whoever wants to take it first, please just raise your hand and identify yourself before you speak for our listening audience at home. But how prevalent is hate crime and hate speech in our community?
I'll take that. I think we're rather blessed in this area, given that we're in the tri-state area and susceptible to other states that surround us. But in this region, Hampshire County and above, the Eastern Panhandle, we haven't seen a lot of it, not nowhere near as much as Morgantown, Monongalia County, Lewis County, and other counties that's been reported where instances have happened. So I think that we're doing what we need to as a law enforcement agency to identify that, address it quickly, and I wouldn't be surprised if there's potentially unreported incidences, just like you have with sex crimes, that's just not identified readily in our officers' investigations. So, I thank God we haven't had any direct hate crimes in this area.
Thank you, Sheriff Harmon. Anyone else want to weigh in?
Well, I should weigh in because I think the reason I'm on this panel is because I'm chair of the Legal Redress Committee of the local NAACP in Berkeley County. And what our committee does is we're available to people. We have a helpline, and people can call to report and get assistance or counseling or advice or mostly empathy. Sympathy and empathy is what we're offering most of all. When someone feels that they have been victimized by a racial incident, by bias. And in 5 years or so, the incidents that have been brought to us have all been bias and, how did you put it, bias and hate incidents. They have not been crimes. So I would have to agree with the sheriff there. There is one caveat, though, and I would say we don't know what kind of crimes are being perpetrated because of the internet. Mm-hmm. In educating myself for this presentation, I read a book called Men Who Hate Women, and what's going on the internet is abominable. And so there are possibly crimes of violence that are being committed on that basis, and we don't know about it.
Thank you, Ms. Caufield. Mr. Powell?
Bill Powell, I'll just add to a little bit of what's already been said, and that is that with respect to the hate crimes in our area, do I think there are more than have been reported? Yes. I think there is a significant underreporting of hate-related crimes. Could be for a number of reasons. This is across the state of West Virginia. I mean, in 2020, according to the FBI, there were under 100 hate crimes reported. I think there was more than that. But quite frankly, oftentimes the crimes are handled in other ways. They're not charged as a hate crime. For instance, it's an assault or attempted murder or an arson, whatever the case may be, where there may be a hate motivation, but it's not charged as such. So I think there's more out there that haven't necessarily been charged as a hate crime, but because there are other avenues for charging, that's when it occurs, and it doesn't show up in the statistics.
Thank you. And Mr. Pollard, anything to add?
Yes, I would absolutely agree with what you just said. I think that there are other avenues that people are taking. I think that there is absolutely an underreporting. And I think that providers, community members, law enforcement can do a better job of building relationships so that these things are reported, so that resources are made for folks who have been victimized and so on.
Thank you very much. It's a wonderful start, I think, for our discussion. We're going to move now into the questions that were developed by groups right here in the room this evening. You're listening to the Panhandle News Wet Network, WEPM and WCST, and Policing of Hate Crimes and Hate Speech, a Stubblefield Institute Community Engagement Conversation live from Shepherd University. Group number 3. Who's the speaker for group number 3? This is theater of their mind at home, folks. All right, great. If you could just say your name and then ask the panel your question.
I'm Effie Callis. I'm a facilitator this evening. The group has the following question. Who makes the decision if speech is just hateful or criminal, and does the impact of the speech make a difference?
Could you repeat the second part of that?
I'll do it in its entirety. Who makes the decision if speech is just hateful or criminal, and does the impact of the speech make a difference?
Start. At the federal level, which is what I'm most familiar with, given my history, the initial reporting or initial filter, so to speak, will be whatever law enforcement agency that would be investigating that particular incident. Normally, in something like that, it would be the Federal Bureau of Investigation. So they would do their investigation and then bring that material to the United States Attorney's Office, and then a decision was made as to whether or not we're talking about a hate incident, so to speak, versus a hate crime. And obviously, from a prosecutor's standpoint, the hate crime will be determined by whether or not you can prove beyond a reasonable doubt the elements of whatever that crime may be applicable to that particular conduct. And I expect that's the same on the state level also, except with different agencies. The Sheriff's Department or a local police department or the state police would be involved and bring it to the local county prosecutor to determine that, make that determination. With respect to the impact, yeah, I think the what happens as a result of the conduct, if it's in fact a crime, it could definitely materialize not only in the nature of the crime being charged, it could affect that, but both state and federal have specific sentencing enhancements when hate-based conduct is involved. So the impact of that particular conduct would be specifically addressed at sentencing in the federal system by the federal sentencing guidelines, and the state system by that statute that the state has, where the judge would take that into account and could enhance or make the sentence that much more severe as a result of particular impact.
Thank you, Mr. Powell. Ms. Caufield?
Yes, I wanted to ask Mr. Powell to elaborate, because the question asked about speech as well. And as far as I understand federal law, that's a different kind of thing.
Oh, hate speech, yes.
Yeah.
No question about it. The hate speech by itself, obviously not a crime. And now there may be some kind of civil remedy depending on the nature of the conduct that we're talking about. Particularly as it relates to, I remember incidents regarding housing or other issues where a civil action may be appropriate, but speech in and of itself without action and meeting the elements of a crime won't be a crime.
Yeah, if I could add to that, you have to prove a criminal intent with the hate speech, because there's obviously the First Amendment, and I've found jaw-dropping material where it, on its face, on its surface level, looks and appears to be hate speech, but it's protected because it's simply just chatter, and there was no criminal intent behind it. Now, I'll take it a step further from what Bill said. Are the officers trained to recognize it? Are the officers trained to be able to handle it appropriately and make the phone calls needed to the prosecuting attorney and allow them to make that decision or get the assistance from federal agencies? And I think leadership has a significant responsibility to make sure their officers and their staff are trained to recognize these things. Like I said, I think one of the big catching trends that you'll find tonight is I think it's underreported. So you have to make sure that your staff knows the red flags to look for. And the impact, if it happens, I think it needs to be addressed aggressively, and it needs to be put out on front stage in the state of West Virginia. It's a $5,000 fine and a 10-year sentence, felony, for a hate crime to happen, especially against a person or their property, if you're tagging it, vandalizing it and putting hate speech up there. But again, you have to prove criminal intent, and I think it's leadership's responsibility to make sure you train your folks on how to identify that. That's the key that you got to prove.
Thank you, Sheriff Harmon. Mr. Pollard, anything to add to the conversation on this one? All right. Group number one.
My name is Courtney. I'm a student at Shepherd University. My group has two questions. The first one, what is the right balance between hate speech versus free speech? And the second question is, what is the panel's reaction about doxing?
And can you go ahead and define doxing for the folks at home?
Yes.
Please.
So doxing is when someone online puts out your personal information, so your full name, your address, and your employment role, things like that online. Yeah, phone number, anything that they can find, they can put it out online, and then people can do whatever they would like to you, whatever their intent is.
Education, first and foremost. We got to understand that obviously our liberties of free speech are protected, but educating the public, educating ourselves on where that line is drawn in the sand, when it crosses over into actual hate speech and you're actually committing a criminal offense. Now, when you talk about doxing, I've heard that before, and I've seen it before, and my advice to folks that are fall victim to that is that's a level of harassment. So there's several different avenues that can be pursued if it's done either in person, locally, or even on social media. There's avenues that can be pursued with that. So the minimal criminal offense that occurs from doxing is harassment.
Any other thoughts on this, Mr. Pollard?
I would say that my opinion about the line between hate speech and freedom of speech is that it's very nuanced. I think it's situational. I think it would have to be considered case by case. My thoughts about doxing is that it is very dangerous, and don't do it.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Powell.
Yeah, let me just say this, hate speech and free speech, I think hate speech is protected, just like also other speech. So I don't differentiate the two. Somebody can get up and say all kinds of hateful things, and somebody can get up and say all kinds of nice things. Constitutionally, they probably have an equal right to say exactly what they're saying. Now, it crosses the line, obviously, when the intent of that speech becomes criminal, and there's some kind of intent to do harm or plan to do harm, some kind of purposeful intimidation as part of that speech, and then it goes into an area that's obviously potentially prosecutable. So I would not necessarily differentiate free speech and hate speech, because quite frankly, they can both be equally protected.
I'll add one more thing to what your two questions was, and this is more of an awareness type of response. All right. First thing is let them talk, because they love hearing themselves, right? And because of it, they offer more evidence. Don't delete it. Let them talk, all right? Because they will, if it's intentional towards you or to the body, they'll come out with that. They'll cross that line, because again, you're talking about narcissistic people, and so I ask is, let them run their mouth, let them give you exactly what you need to take it a step further, right? Because we've got plenty of resources, internet, online, and the like, to take care of that.
Thank you, Sheriff Harmon. All right, group number 4 has the next question. And if you could say your name and just your role here this evening.
Hi, I'm Key, and I'm a student here at Shepherd University. And our question is, can hate speech be formally policed?
I would say yes, it can be. And formally means, at least my interpretation of that, is making sure that the public is educated through our officers, because if you think of how many people our officers encounter in a day's time, right? Let's call it 10. Well, those 10 have 10 friends and whatnot. So it's the interaction with the public. It's holding community events like we do each year in May, and getting folks to the table and inviting the citizens to come and look at the resources within the county or their tri-county area for assistance if they need it, and education on certain things like hate speech. So I think it can be addressed formally, just like your anti-bullying and bullying initiatives that occur. I think it can be handled very similarly.
Thank you, Sheriff Harmon. Anyone else on the panel want to weigh in on that? Mr. Powell?
I would just say, emphasize that with respect to policing, it's a hard job, particularly in some communities where the trust level isn't always as good as it otherwise would be. And I think that's part of the reason it's so important to report incidents of hate, not just hate crimes, but incidents of hate, because unless the police know what's going on in the community and who's saying what, even if it's not chargeable, it's a historical record, and down the road it helps. It potentially help a good bit if it goes farther than that. for purposes of actual policing and prosecution and the like. So it's so important from a police standpoint for the community to report these incidents, and a record of them can be made.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Pollard.
I would piggyback off of that and say that it is very important because programs like myself and Rita's use that data or use those reports to get people connected to services and to resources in the community.
Well, and I guess the ultimate form of hate speech that we've been dealing with is several people who have come to us have talked about use of the N-word in all kinds of contexts, education, government agencies, and the police. So the problem is, what do you do when the hate speech is coming from the police?
Hi, Katana Rakestraw, and I'm a student here at Shepherd University. And my group's question is, how do you each manage hate speech in your own perspective areas, especially when it occurs online or maybe anonymous?
I will just, Rita, is it? Or, I mean, what's your name?
Katana.
Katana? Katana, I would say again, do not delete it, keep it, and just as well as it might not reach the level that it needs to do to be prosecutable, but the officer there with you, you can get a better understanding of what that level may be, and you don't delete those things. Of course, you don't antagonize it either, but don't delete those things. Those are that's physical evidence. I mean, there's IP addresses. There's some phenomenal things that state, county, and federal agencies have at their disposal to be able to track that, even if they want to make you think that it's anonymous, okay? I mean, I won't go into the details of those resources, but it can be tracked. And obviously, it's a concern if you're reporting it. And I think before the officers walk away, that they need to emphasize, at what level does it become criminal and what level is it at right now before they leave. Because you don't want, and we try to educate the officers to the point to where, put yourself in the victim's shoes, and if someone walks away from me and I don't understand what just happened, I don't understand why something's not being done about it, then I'm going to have that. That's going to stick with me for a while. So we advocate our officers be able to make sure that the victims understand that what's occurring and what's not occurring. So definitely don't delete it, and if it's happening, it's probably going to happen again and escalate thereafter.
Thank you, Sheriff Harmon. And a quick follow-up with this and piggybacking on something Ms. Caufield brought up. What would you say to somebody who believes they have experienced an incident of hate speech from a law enforcement officer? You as the sheriff, obviously that would come to you. Is it something that they should bring or feel comfortable bringing? Because I can imagine the intimidation there. So I'd like you to speak to that if you could, because I think that's something that this dialogue could use, is hearing from someone who would be addressing that very thing.
Well, absolutely. So people could be intimidated even coming to the office physically. It's the most recorded building in the county, I think. It's got cameras all over it, audible and visual. And we made sure that our citizens had the availability of reporting online anonymously, calling in anonymously, and making these complaint. And we investigate those internally. And I'm proud to say that we have sent our officers to targeted violence and terrorism, extremism classes, courses, and verbal deconfliction courses, and how to mitigate conflict and de-escalate situations, and crisis intervention. And through that training, they get exposed to what those red flags are. And it would be surprising to me if someone from our agency did that. Has it happened before? I'm sure it has. But understand from an agency standpoint that would be investigated internally, and we would also get back with the person that reported it if they identified themselves to let them know what happened.
My name is Craig Klein. I'm a facilitator here this evening, and we have a two-part question. How far can government constitutionally go to police hate speech, and how can we address hate speech when we hear it?
So how far can the government go? And I guess that's the fire in a burning building. Or rather, you can't yell fire in a theater or say bomb on a plane. Is there a place where hate speech is not allowed?
Bill can probably answer this a lot better than I can. There's my deflection. No, I will tell you that I felt on occasion that I've been victim of hate speech. You know, being a political figure and out there on the forefront, I've obviously have people that don't like me. So, there's only to find out that it's protected speech. I was, and being disappointed. I feel like a victim, but it's protected. So how far can government go? My opinion, not too far with hate speech because it's protected. Again, there has to be criminal intent versus being offended. You know what I mean? So I guess, I learned a lot. I have to have thicker skin, and I don't think you can do anything about hate speech.
I don't know what you're doing. Nobody ever says anything hateful to me. I think from a constitutional standpoint, the Constitution will determine how far government can go with respect to hate speech. Hate speech, everybody remembers the Nazis. There are lots of Supreme Court cases with respect to hate speech from the Nazis and other groups like that that is constitutionally protected. Depending on the circumstances, there may be civil causes of action that government can bring depending on the circumstance, like, for instance, housing or other types of specific business issues. But by and large, speech in and of itself without other motivation or intent is speech, and by and large protected. I can't remember the other part of the question, part B.
Other parts, what we can do as community members to combat hate speech.
Okay. Educate. I think by and large people who are speaking hateful things are uneducated and generally not worthy of listening to. I think that obviously the internet makes it hard. But I've told I don't want to go in parental mode here, but I've had many conversations with formerly teenage sons when people were saying things that were hateful or stupid, to walk away. Don't give them the time of day. It doesn't serve any purpose, and people like that are looking for an audience. They're looking for a sounding board or people to get a reaction. If you don't give them a reaction, then I think generally speaking, everyone's better off in the end.
Thank you, Mr. Powell. Ms. Caufield, you had comments?
Well, how about some proactive education, like, for example, in the schools? After we're basically focusing mostly on race, I think in my committee we have, but the hate speech directed toward women and other groups is abominable. And why is it, I can't imagine why in this country we can't do a little bit better for regulating the internet. There's something called Section 230 of the Decency in Communications Act from 1996 or something. That needs to be, it was originally intended to protect young people from these horrible kinds of speech that they see on the internet. And it was declared unconstitutional by the Supreme Court, and it's never been revisited. And I think that there's more that could be done. We need to protect our young people from this horrible stuff on the internet. And if we can't, until we can do better, we need to do better proactively in our educational system. It's more important than to just say educate. We need to have specific plans. We need to get into those schools and do classes on diversity, respect for one another, respect for different philosophies, different genders, whatever. We need to do better.
Thank you, Ms. Caufield. Mr. Pollard.
This is a shameless plug, but I'm very proud to say it. You can get yourself or folks that you know that have been a victim of a hate incident connected to my program That's literally what we established it for. So folks who are dealing with those issues, we provide full wraparound service, so connection to legal counsel and advice, connection to mental health services, connection to housing resources. We help create reports, help you file reports or go through whatever process you feel best fits your situation. So there are community resources that you can get in contact with to help you through those situations.
And that's the Eastern Panhandle Empowerment Center and Stop Hate WV. I'll finish the plug for you.
Thank you.
All right, we have another question from our final group this evening for the folks at home listening on the Panhandle News Network, WEPM and WCST. This is Stubblefield Institute Community Engagement Conversation, Policing of Hate Crimes and Hate Speech. Our panel this evening coming from a number of different perspectives to give us what I think is a very well-rounded conversation. Rita Caufield, Legal Redress Committee Chair at the Berkeley County NAACP, Berkeley County Sheriff Nathan Harmon, Hate Crime Victim Advocate Keith Pollard of the aforementioned Eastern Panhandle Empowerment Center and Stop Hate WV, and former U.S. Attorney Bill Powell, who's been giving us lots of free legal advice this evening. Disclaimer, do not, no. He's waving it off, don't worry. For
I'm
folks
not
at
your
home.
lawyer.
All right, for the last time, Hans, I'm not your lawyer.
Hello, I'm Shelby Dougherty, and I am the facilitator for group number 5 this evening. So our question that we've formulated are there any specific methods or models to teach individuals that their hate speech and or actions are harmful to others?
And maybe this goes to what you were saying, Ms. Caufield. Are there things that you can come and teach in schools? Are there specific models or curriculum anyone's familiar with that would be helpful for that purpose?
I am not familiar with any specific ones, but I am familiar with a dismaying incident in Morgan County, where a teacher in the high schools there was doing a class on diversity, and I'm blocking a little bit on exactly what her class was called, but she was asked to leave that position, and the program shut down. It was a program addressing these issues, respecting different kinds of people, and the powers that be felt like she was treading on thin water politically. It's unpopular politically to be so generous, so it was shut down.
I do know that this grant-funded project, it's called Project Aware. It deals with mental health first aid. It also deals with bullying. It also deals with potential hate speech or hate evolving into hate crimes, and identifying this stuff early. And what I loved about taking that course long ago was that you broke up in groups just like you did earlier, and then you built up with various injects thereafter on particular scenarios. It could have been a hate speech scenario, it could have been a bullying scenario, it could have been a drug experience type of thing, and it goes into suicide prevention as well. But it's called Project Aware. It was grant funded. Sometimes I think it takes a hit in terms of funding, but if you ask me, hands down, that course is free to everybody. Parents, it's open to the community. I know educators take that class. I was at the Summit Point Training Center as an instructor when I took that class because it dived a little into, threat assessments and the propensity of violence for folks and what that blueprint looks like. But that is a project that I'm aware of. I'm sure that there's more, though. Berkeley County is very, very rich in resources and stuff, so I'm not going to pretend to know all of them, but my experience with Project Aware, it covers a lot of things.
I'll follow up, Bill Powell, I'll follow up on Ms. Caufield's comments regarding what the schools could be doing, and I don't know of any particular programs. I do think that parents should also be involved in that training process, because quite frankly, that's a lot of this stuff starts at home. I will tell you, from a personal standpoint, my wife, she's an exceptionally patient person, and she subs in Berkeley County and mostly deals with special needs students at the very young level, kindergarten, first grade, thereabouts. So autism, and they're everything you can imagine. And many times those classes are mixed, special needs and quote unquote not special needs, but other students, multiracial situations. And here's what you don't see: hate. Those students are as kind and open and selfless to a student who has special needs, to a student that doesn't look like them, and it is totally innocent. And somewhere that changes. I don't know where it changes. I'm not nearly smart enough to understand it. I expect part of it's at home, part of it could be internet, could be other things, but at some point it changes. And we have to make training and education at some part of that early stage so that we can help that not change.
I believe that we make ourselves victims of our own circumstance as law enforcement agencies, because when we look at training, we look at it as overhead. What's the return in that? I'm sending guys away, or ladies away, paying exuberant amounts of money, and they come back while they're off shift. I'm understaffed already. You know, there's a whole gamut of things that run through a leadership's mind, but you cannot be tied down to those obstacles. You got to find ways to defeat that. You build instructors. You send folks, again, reach out to all the resources locally, and you'll find one resource complements the other, and that area will get addressed. And I think that law enforcement needs to be trained in identifying these things, all the way down to, you know, situations where they're dealing with an autistic person, identifying that their non-compliance might not be because they're being non-compliant. They could be deaf. They could be autistic. There could be a lot of things that are going on. And I find it negligent if a department is not investing in that kind of training. And breaking down the wall of various stigmatisms and stereotypes that eventually make an officer callous. I mean, when you're lied to 20 times a day and you come up upon the honest citizen, would the officer walk into that thinking this person, whatever they say, is going to be a lie? And you have to make sure your officers have the tools and equipment and training to identify that it's not, and that everybody deserves empathy and a fresh, unbiased look into their situation as they respond to it.
All right. We have another question. All of you had talked about West Virginia being not seeing, here in the Eastern Panhandle at least, the kind of increase in hate crimes that FBI statistics show are happening in the rest of the country. Do you believe that's underreporting, or is there something else happening in our area that is keeping that rate lower than elsewhere?
Definitely being underreported, and as a result, probably underenforced because it's not being reported for lots of reasons. One of the reasons as I said earlier, was because particularly as it relates to hate crimes, there's a crime, a substantive crime, taking the hate out of it for a second, that can be prosecuted. Quite frankly, it's often easier to prove, easier to investigate a crime that you can prosecute and put somebody away for a long period of time without having to worry about the hate aspect of it. Not that it's not important, but from a practical standpoint, proving intent is one of the most difficult things from a prosecution and a police standpoint that you can try to prove. Second thing, people don't report because they're fear of reprisals. Perhaps maybe the police aren't listening correctly, or they just don't. As Sheriff Harmon said, they're too busy doing other things. They didn't get to it. So any number of things could be causing it, but certainly underreporting is a big part of what's not going on.
Any other thoughts? Yes, Ms. Caufield, please.
I have this Association of Chiefs of Police responding to hate crimes. It's a paper, Responding to Hate Crimes, a police officer's guide to investigation and prevention. And when you read through this, you can see that it's very difficult to gather the information necessary to prove hate was involved as a motivator in a crime. And as I was reading through this, I was thinking what they were suggesting that the officer on the scene do in terms of the steps to take, securing the scene, gathering evidence, et cetera, and then after securing the scene, how you relate to the victim. I have to say that all of these things are almost the antithesis of what the people who come to us experience from the police. I mean, this suggests empathy when you're interviewing the victims and the witnesses thoroughly and respectfully, suggest help to the victims. Well, obviously I can't go through all this. Effective ways for police to support victims while investigating the crime. Let the victim defer answering questions, request assistance of translators, ask the victim how they want you to help them. I mean, there's a list of 15 things that you would warmly relate to a victim. And it just doesn't happen. I mean, I don't know whether the police aren't, I think the police are just not trained to do it. It would take a lot of effort. And I don't think that it's how our police are, it's the antithesis of what many of us think of as a police officer. I'm sorry to say.
I'm not going to disagree with her. Like I said earlier, and we're hinted on to, I think we have shelved, especially post-COVID times. Look at all the trainings were virtual, and I can tell you what, turn the camera off, act like you're taking a class, go out and mow your grass. If you're going to trust folks to take courses like that, and it's just not going to be practical. They're not going to learn anything from that. So I think Rita's correct. We need a more of an investment from leadership into their men and women, and making sure that they have the tools that they need to wear the many hats that they're required to wear.
Thank you, Sheriff Harmon. Mr. Powell?
Keith,
Keith?
And I think I would just go back to what I said earlier. I think that all of us have touched on education and awareness, but I think that we can absolutely do a better job as community leaders building relationships with the folks in the community so they feel safe enough and have enough trust to report when they are going through something, to raise awareness that there are resources in the community that they can access, and that so that they can know when they do report that there will be something done that will be taken serious.
Yes, Mr.
I would just add to what Rita was saying earlier, and I think it's important to state, because I do think the police, I mean, they've talked to the victims, but their primary focus after that is the perpetrator. They're trying to figure out who did what and whether they can prove it or not. And I think one of the things that I certainly experienced, I know Sheriff Harmon has too in Jefferson County, but a lot of these prosecutors' offices has, and certainly I as the U.S. Attorney had, a victim advocate. And more money can be spent in those areas because those people are outstanding as it relates to victims. They talk to them all the time. They see what they can do for them. There's a lot of empathy at that end for the victims to try to get them through that process. So perhaps that's an area that it could be beefed up, and it serves as a complement to the police, and it certainly helps the prosecutor. And the fact of the matter is, unfortunately, I'll say in the judicial process, oftentimes people that are least thought of are the witnesses and the victims, and that obviously needs to change some.
It's former U.S. Attorney Bill Powell, Keith Pollard, hate crime victim advocate with the Eastern Panhandle Empowerment Center and Stop Hate, Nathan Harmon, Berkeley County Sheriff, and with the Berkeley County NAACP, Rita Caufield. They are panelists this evening for Policing of Hate Crimes and Hate Speech, a Stubblefield Institute community engagement conversation. If you're just joining us at home on WEPM and WCST, the Panhandle News Network, I'm Hans Fogle moderating this evening. We have a few questions I know from our audience, so I will ask you again to just say your name and ask your question to the panel.
My name's Rebecca Phipps, and I kind of have two questions. I can be real quick. For one, what do the data show? How many people have been arrested or charged or prosecuted or sent away or fined or whatever for any kind of hate crime or hate speech in the Panhandle, or maybe in, I don't know, jurisdictions, but Berkeley County? that's the first part of the question. The other question, it just seems like there's an elephant in the room that has yet to be, the words have yet to be spoken, and that's Wayne Jones. What was that other than a hate murder done by the police? And those are my questions, if you could speak to both of those.
So starting, does anyone have statistics for hate crime prosecutions or charges in the last
Yeah,
however long?
the recent data that I've pulled was that in 2018 there were 28. In 2018 there was 28. 2019 there was 18, and then 2020 there was 30.
That's the whole state, right?
Yeah, that's the whole state. Now, when you break that down into counties, you're looking at counties like areas like Morgantown, Moundsville, Wheeling, Hardy, Lewis, Mason. But your two most popular issues that you deal with is race and religion. Of course, there's a lot more. I mean, you got sexual orientation, disability, gender, and all those others. But race and religion seem to be the top two. And it's less with the religion part, but generally like you're seeing what's going on in the Gaza Strip and with Israel and stuff, obviously those issues tend to spark others' issues in that area of religion and stuff. So,
Do you think lack of diversity in the population plays a role there?
depending on what part of the state you're from,
Right.
Absolutely.
You see where the hotbeds are, and it's
Yeah.
more diverse regions for
And
sure.
I also think those statistics are somewhat misleading for the reasons I said earlier regarding reporting. But also, those statistics are FBI statistics, and only 50% of the police agencies sent in statistics. So we already have cut in half what it is the FBI is relying upon for purposes of calculating those statistics. So I expect it's higher than that, but not nearly reflective of the actual numbers of hate-related incidents.
How does that understanding change what you do in law enforcement or legal proceedings, knowing that you have these numbers, but the numbers are likely inaccurate? Does that change how you approach things or the trainings you choose?
Yeah, you got to stay current with it. I mean, you can't just give them the training and say, check that box and we're good, and then not revisit that for the next 4 years. So I think as an agency standpoint, well, we've implemented what we call in-service days, and that'll happen every October annually. That's where folks like Bill, the prosecuting attorney's office, ABC, ATF, FBI, victim advocates like Keith, or the NAACP, they can actually have a block of time to say, hey, this is who we are, this is what we do, and educate the officers in terms of, and revisiting those issues and having that every single year, because there's evolution involved in this stuff, and we want to make sure that we're up to date with it.
And Ms. Caufield, you had something to add. I'm sorry.
Yes, I appreciate Rebecca Phipps bringing attention to the Wayne Jones situation. One of the questions earlier referred to what can we do together, how can government agencies work together? And our group has been pretty disappointed in the Martinsburg Police Department because after the Wayne Jones murder, and 10 years ago, for 10 years we've been holding a vigil every month trying to seek some accountability on the part of the city for this murder of a black man, clearly racially motivated. This was a hate crime. And we put an ad in the paper recently saying after 10 years, we have been trying to meet with, we've had several meetings with the city, and what we're seeking is that the 5 officers, some of whom are still in the force, at least 2, be retrained, the people who were involved in the killing of Wayne Jones, that the department institute policies to identify and discourage racist attitudes. This is a very racist area, and there's a lot of racism in the police department in Martinsburg. Train all current and future officers in the need for and mandatory use of de-escalation techniques, collect data to track incidents of racial bias in traffic stops and other arrests, and assure the public that an incident such as Wayne Jones' killing will never happen again. We have consistently asked for this. There was a $3.5 million settlement with the family. There has never been an apology or a statement of accountability on the part of the city. And And we've been trying in good faith to implement programs, maybe a civilian police review board, without success.
Thank you, Ms. Caufield, and thank you for bringing that back. I didn't mean to move away from it as the conversation continued. It's actually interesting when you bring that up, because at Shepherd University, when hate speech is reported, the student perpetrating it is brought in for training in a one-on-one session to increase their awareness. Does a program like that exist for civilians? And do any of you think that it would be a good idea? Again, it's not illegal, so you can't mandate it by law, but do you know of any program where someone could come and have that kind of retraining or conversation on the civilian side?
Yeah, I don't honestly know of one that exists like that, but I think organizations like Keith participates in, I think that would be an excellent idea.
And I think that there are some organizations in the state that do some restorative justice work, but I can't think of them.
Visit the website for more. Keep doing the plug, Keith. Keep doing the plug. The West Virginia hate crime statute does not include either sexual preference or disability, that's physical or mental disability, as qualifying categories. Do you believe it should? I think that is reflected in the federal, if I'm correct. Is that something
there's
that we should
disability.
add?
Yeah, there's
For West
crimes against the disabled.
Okay.
We actually just recently charged somebody who was a family member supposed to take care of their elderly mother and neglectfully did not, and it resulted in her death. And so we are, again, our department's blessed with folks that are trained and be able to identify and hold folks accountable for their actions. So I think this disability is part of it, right, Bill?
I wrote these down actually ahead of time because I anticipated Hans' brilliant question.
So I can't take credit for this one.
The common categories between West Virginia and federal are race, color, national origin, religion, and sex. West Virginia also has two that federals do not, and that's ancestry and political affiliation. Who'd have thunk? And then federal has additionally disability, sex orientation, family status, and gender identity, which West Virginia does not.
Those are the ones that are on federal,
but not West Virginia.
Not West Virginia. Does that ever create a conflict, or does one override the other? Is that, or do you just prosecute at a different level based on the offense?
Well, I think the federal enforcement is always stronger than the state enforcement when it comes to some of these statutes, just because the nature of the sentencing statute. But there's always communication between federal and state authorities about where the best place for a particular case is to. So some of the federal statutes require things that sometimes can't be proven, like interstate commerce or something like that, that the state statute doesn't allow. So it depends on the specific nature of the crime and the elements, but yeah, those communications often take place.
Thank you, Mr. Powell. We have time for maybe one more question from the audience. I see a hand in the back, and I'll go and again ask you just to state your name and ask your question.
Hi, my name is Mary Burkhart. I can't get over this 50% accountability or recording to the FBI. Who was it who said that 50% is enough? And who needs to mandate more complete, comprehensive reporting? Because statistics like that are used often in new industries or education or recreation facilities. So I don't understand why a statistic that I feel is important is so badly mishandled and neglected.
Yeah, I feel your pain. I've dealt with this before, and this is not just hate crime stuff. This is the FBI issues crime statistics every year on all kinds of crimes nationally, and they depend on law enforcement agencies from across the country to basically data dump their stuff. Unfortunately, many departments don't have the technology, the software, the ability, the manpower to send that stuff in on a regular basis. That's a lot of it. Some of it's just they don't feel like it. I expect that's going on. Obviously, the more the better. I expect 58% the FBI would consider a banner year from a response standpoint, believe it or not. But that's just the nature of the beast. They can't force them to send data in. It's not like they're constitutionally mandated to do it. Obviously, the better way, is to get that data, and so you can do something with it. But
We're on go ahead, wrap up real quick. We've got just about 60 seconds.
So just to kind of add to what Bill said, our county went to a new reporting system that cost well over $1 million, and a transition occurred in that. There's a growing pains that occurs in that. Now, it all depends on how things are reported. I called our 911 director on the way over here to try to get, any statistics whatsoever, locally or the like, and there's a difference between harassment, destruction of property. Is that getting lost in translation by the officer there on scene? Is it graffiti as the destruction of property? But what is that graffiti? It cannot be interpreted as a hate crime. If it's reported as destruction of property and not added to as a hate crime or listed as a hate crime specifically, it doesn't get reported as such. And I realized that on the drive over here. So we're going to be a little bit more definitive on our calls.
Thank you very much. We are out of time. We are going to have to turn it back over to Ashley Hurst, the Executive Director of the Stubblefield Institute, but I do want to thank Sheriff Harmon, Ms. Caufield, Mr. Pollard, and Mr. Powell, all for not only coming and being willing to speak to the audience tonight and answer their questions, but also apparently many of you doing lots of research so that you would be able to answer the questions in a mindful and consistent manner this evening. Thanks to the Panhandle News Network and the Stubblefield Institute. I'll hand it back over to Ashley.
So I think we can all respect what a complex issue this is, and I hope that we've all gained a bit of an understanding about really the dynamics of it and why it can be a difficult topic and a difficult subject to police. We do have refreshments in the back that we invite you to join in after our discussion concludes. And finally, if you found that this conversation was useful and valuable to you, I do invite you to join with us in bringing these conversations to our community by making a gift to the Stubblefield Institute. And there's more information on our website about that. Thank you again, and safe travels to your next location.